In 5 days' time, I will be 66 years old. So I'm surely the oldest person in this room, and quite possibly the oldest person you're going to see on this platform. So humor me a little while, humor an old man a little while. I thought I would talk a little bit about my rather crazy life, all the zigzags and the wrong turns it has taken, and many of those wrong turns have, in retrospect, proved to be right turns. So I thought I'd just tell you about 5 little stories from my life and draw some conclusions from them. The first one begins when I'm 8 years old and my father takes his young family off to Somalia, a country in East Africa and the Horn of Africa. At that stage, in the 1960s, easily one of the most beautiful countries in Africa and possibly the world. I know it's very troubled now, it wasn't then. But as a child, what I didn't realize, and actually gave no credence to, no weight to, was the fact that I was immersed in a civilization that was so different from my own, different food, different culture, different life, different climate, different everything. But that meant nothing to me. As far as I was concerned, I was them and they were me. As if to reinforce this, at the age of 11, I was packed off to a British boarding school. Now, if you're not familiar with that, let me tell you that a British boarding school of the 1960s was only marginally less luxurious than a British jail of the 1960s. So there was I, and it just occurred to me the other day, half a century later, that I was the first and only child of color in that school. There were 360 other kids. But not for a moment did I see them as being different from me, or me as being different from them. I didn't make them the other, nor did I make myself the other. And that was probably the first lesson I learned, but in retrospect, I think one spends so much of one's adult life unlearning the truths of childhood. And at some point, you need to reverse that. I was lucky, after school, I got myself a place to read pure mathematics at Oxford University, at a college called Christ Church, which you may know of, you may have seen it in the Harry Potter films. One thing that mathematics taught me, and for me, still today, you may know me as a writer, but the one true love of my life is pure mathematics, because underneath the chaos of our world, there is this very calm, ordered, rigid world of pure mathematics, which is immutable. It's unchanging. Any discoveries that are made subsequently from now only add to the canon of the previous knowledge. It does not change it in any way. So the truths of maths are permanent, and they're just waiting for us to discover them. I left Oxford, and I had this crazy idea that I wanted to stay on in England. Still to this day, I don't know why I did, but I did. Now, I didn't have a visa, so I got myself a job as a laborer on a building site in South London. It was the strangest job, but this was Britain in the 1980s under Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, and the country was awash with money. I got paid cash in the hand at the end of the day. It was a lot of money. I was really thrilled with it. But if I wasn't happy, I just went along the road to the next building site and got hired immediately. They just needed people. Now, the guys on this building site were not English. For the most part, they were Irish or West Indian, and one little lone South Asian, me. Of course, there were lots of Asians in London, but they were too posh to be mixing sand and cement. Most of them were waiters, or they ran the corner shops, but they didn't get their hands dirty. But you know what? I loved it. It was really, for me, I got muscles where there were no muscles before, and I went to sleep at the end of the day feeling that warm glow of happiness. Those 8 years were some of the best in my life. Now comes the crunch. I never told any of those people that I had a maths degree from Oxford. So this is my next advice to you. Never bring the baggage of a past life into your present one. Just don't do it. It will only end badly. People will find out in their own sweet time. Let them do it at their own pace. Don't inflict it on them, because what you're doing is you're being very self-indulgent and saying, look at me, aren't I great? I've got this. I brought it to the table. What is important is what you are now at this present moment, and not what you fondly imagine you were and what you're bringing to the table. That's not important. What is important is what you are now. Okay, I worked really hard at this job, and I went from being a laborer on the building site to being the owner of the building site. I got myself a loan at the suicidal rate of 27.6% interest, which was like something around my throat there, and against all odds, it worked. A little note about working hard, by the way. Lots of people will tell you, don't work so hard. Take time off to smell the roses. Well, I would beg to differ on this. When you're young and there's a fire in your belly, let it rage. Run with it as far as it'll take you. And when it's time to move on, please do. But while you're in it, particularly when you're young, go with it. There's time enough to smell the roses when you get to my age. Okay, so I worked hard, and in those 8 years that I was there, I had bought, developed, and sold 84 freeholds in London. 84 flats in London, I kept the freeholds. Now, I had said to myself that at the age of 30, I would retire and come back home. But where was home? Home was that mythical place called Sri Lanka. Now, I had only ever lived there till the age of 8. So I knew nothing about Sri Lanka. So it was a sort of an intellectual decision that Sri Lanka was home and I would go there. I turned 30 and the money was so good and I was enjoying myself so much. Just imagine a young man in this big city, that I didn't want to go. To make matters worse, my friends, all of them said to me, are you crazy to go back? The money is so good, why are you leaving? You will die of boredom in Sri Lanka, they said. It's a cultural desert, they said. So 30 came and 30 went, and I still hadn't gone. 2 months before my 31st birthday, I cashed in my chips and flew home. And then the strangest thing happened. The market in London peaked, and it went down and down and down. By the end of that year, the market in London had crashed. And then I got all these calls to Sri Lanka. How did you know? How did you know? What made you do this? Well, the truth is, I didn't know. I mean, that's God's honest truth. I didn't know. I had just made up this damn fool idea that I was going to cash in my chips, go back home when I'm 30, whether I'd done well or badly, just go home. Also, I suppose, there was a little intuition there that this streak of great good fortune was not going to last forever. That at some point, I would have to get off that hamster wheel and cash in my chips. So here's my next point. Be advised that there is a system all around you. It's a benevolent system, and it will nudge you this way or that. Now, you have your free will. You don't have to listen to the hints. But once in a while, perhaps it would serve you well to listen. Now, this is something very strange, and you probably think I'm a cracko saying it, but you can call it karma, you can call it destiny, you can call it God, you can call it what you will. It is there. It is almost as if, or it is as if you're in a boat in the middle of the ocean. As far as the eye can see, there is nothing. You're all alone. And you're waiting for that gust of wind. And you have to be ready to trim your sails to catch that wind, which will take you in another direction. That's about as far as I can go on that. Okay, so I came back home, and I decided in my foolish way that I would build houses from scratch. Now, that's quite different from what I did in London, which was knocking down walls and putting in bathrooms and kitchens. Here, I was building from scratch. I had to teach myself that from zero. Now, here's my next point. Never approach a new discipline by saying, Yeah, I know it all. I know pretty much everything there is to know about it. Go back to zero each time and learn from there. Because if you don't go back to zero, you will have the entitlement, the arrogance of that half knowledge that you're bringing to the table. If you come in at zero and say, I know nothing, I'm here to learn, you will learn. Remember that. It's really important. And if halfway through that new discipline, you realize, yes, you did know quite a bit of this anyway, that's a bonus. But don't, for God's sake, take it for granted. So I did this in Sri Lanka for about 12 years, and then comes the absolute worst part of my life. My father gets cancer. And for every one of you here, you will have the dubious, I can't call it pleasure, of watching a loved one die. I don't recommend it, but it's going to happen. Get ready for it. For me, it was easily the worst time of my life. I remember he had cancer of the throat. I remember taking him off the Maharagama, bringing him back, and trying to force him to eat one banana because he wouldn't be able to eat anything for the next 2 days. After one of these trips, he came back and he collapsed on the bed. I went into the next room and foraged about. I found a little exercise book and a pencil, and I began to write. And in half an hour, I had finished an entire short story. That short story is the first one in my first book. It went in unchanged. But the really funny part is this. It's full of jokes. Every other line is ha, ha, he, he. Now, here is my father dying in one room, and I'm writing funny jokes in a book. So the point I'm making here is you have no idea of what you are capable of unless you leave yourself open to it. Now, I could have easily said at the end of that story, well, that's a flash in the pan. I don't have an English degree. What am I doing trying to write? But I think I kept myself open. 25 years later, quarter of a century later, I can now perhaps think of myself as a writer. I have 7 books under my belt. But I never won a single thing from those books. I was nominated dozens of times until last year, when I won the big one, the Gratian Prize, which was founded by Michael Ondaatje. It's the big one in Sri Lanka. But here is my point. Don't do something for the prizes. Don't do something because you got a certificate to hang on the wall. Forget about the kudos, the money, the fame, the riches. Do it quite simply because you like it. And in some foolish way, you imagine that you can contribute something to that great river of humanity. Do it for those 2 reasons, nothing else. I still build houses, and I have to say I haven't won anything. At the last Jeffrey Barber Award, I was nominated for a prize, and my friend Palinda Kanangara, who you heard earlier on, brilliant architect, he won it. And I was so thrilled to be in his company. But that's as far as it goes. Maybe if I'm lucky, 25 years from now, I might win the prize, but it'll be no damn use for me. I'll be 6 foot underground by then. So that's pretty much what I have to tell you. Conclusions? Not really sure, but that number 0 is really important. Bring 0 with you when you come to your new life. Start at 0 when you start a new discipline. That is the only way to go up. Don't start halfway. Don't pretend or assume you know too much. So, what about me? What next for me? Well, I'm in that boat, becalmed in the ocean, waiting for that next gust of wind. When will it come? Where will it take me? I don't know, but I'm waiting.